Well, it appears that the MAGA civil war between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Republican Speaker Mike Johnson has taken a sharp and escalatory turn, and we've got the clips to prove it. But before we play them, I want to bring in my buddy and yours, Luke Beasley of The Luke Beasley Show. What's up, Luke?
Oh, it is so great to be with you, Josiah.
And to celebrate the visible crumbling of the Republican Party in real time during an election year. Doesn't that delight you? Delights me.
It delights me. If there's one thing more politically damaging than a Trump criminal trial, it just might be the chaos we're seeing in the House for them.
I completely agree. And with that in mind, let's jump into the first clip. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene announcing to the world that Speaker Mike Johnson may not have that title for very long.
He's definitely not going to be Speaker next Congress if we're lucky enough to have the majority. And I think that is widely held belief throughout the conference.
Is he going to be Speaker for the rest of this Congress, do you think?
That is to be determined.
All right, Luke, so obviously there's some other things that we're going to talk about. Mike Johnson's response, Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky throwing his hat in the ring that is escalating this threat further. But what do you make of this? Because for context, prior to this, Mike Johnson was trying to assure America that he and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're BFFs. Sure, she ignores his texts, and sure, she says that he is full of excrement and he doesn't keep his promises, but they're friends, and that Donald Trump, their mutual master, has his back. It doesn't seem that she's getting the message at all.
Yeah, so I talked about Josiah in a past segment, the weird asymmetry of respect going on between the two of them, where Mike Johnson speaks about Marjorie Greene like they have this good relationship and I consider her a friend and I understand her concerns. And then Marjorie Greene just says whatever she wants about Mike Johnson in public. And there was that sad interview moment you may have covered where Mike Johnson gets asked about her and says, yeah, I texted her over the break and she said she wasn't interested in talking. I said, give me a call. It's just very sad. But there's that phrase, I think a different term is usually used in it, but it goes something like, if every person you meet is a jerk, maybe you're the jerk. And I think for someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene and for MAGA, they keep thinking, gosh, every single leader we select is never MAGA enough, never good enough. And that's a problem with every single leader, and we're just going to keep ousting them. But in reality, the problem is them.
100%. And it puts us both kind of in an awkward position. I am almost certain that you have said this verbatim, if I were a betting man, which is it's putting us in a weird position where we don't know who to root for because both of the people are just so awful, right? Like it's like watching Dracula versus Wolfman or something like that. And you're like, well, they both suck. Who do I want to triumph in the end? And I want to say before we play the clip of Mike Johnson's response to this, I do find it interesting, too, that over the weekend, when Johnson went down to Mar-a-Lago to hold that nonsense joint press conference about election integrity, right, it seemed that it had a dual purpose, which is Johnson was running to Donald Trump to basically try to get under that aegis, that protective shield, and basically to show Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, yeah, I've got Trump on my side, I've got Trump. And Trump said, Marjorie, I'm sure she has total respect for the speaker. And what's interesting about that is twofold. Mike Johnson's the Speaker of the House, and as you said, that asymmetry. If anything, she should be showing respect to Mike Johnson, given that he is the leader, he is the most powerful elected Republican, at least on paper, in the federal government. And he's showing her more respect than vice versa. He's running to Trump, who holds no elected office, for protection that he shouldn't need. And most bewilderingly, it doesn't seem to be working. Have you noticed that? Like the fact that Trump is kind of tepidly trying to signal to Marjorie, hey, chill out, and she's not following commands. That's really fascinating to me, don't you think?
Totally. So 2 points on that, and then I know we have more to show to the audience in terms of clips. The first is this represents a really scary reality, which is that there is more MAGA than Trump, and Trump could become politically irrelevant after a hopeful defeat of him, and there will still be this contingent of the Republican Party that will be loud and proud, and that's unfortunate. And we've talked about in the past the fact that it could transform into something, if you can even imagine this, even more dangerous and disorganized and harmful to serious governance. And so we're seeing a little peek into that here, where Marjorie is trying to be more sort of purity testy and more pure MAGA than Mike Johnson, obviously. But now that Trump is joining the side of Mike Johnson, then even Trump, she's not listening to the advice of Trump, which shows you there could be more where Trump came from that's even more crazy, which is just crazy and horrible to think about. The second point is I recently interviewed Congressman Ro Khanna and asked him about the potential of Democrats saving Mike Johnson. And he said, if he's willing to get Ukraine aid through, we would definitely consider saving his job amid a potential ouster attempt. That is crazy, like you talked about, because it's weird to be imagining a situation where MAGA Mike, as we used to call him, would be saved by Democrats.
No, 100%. I definitely want to explore that with you further because Congressman Jared Moskowitz, in the aftermath of all of this, has gone to Twitter to make his opinion well known. But to your point, we do have another clip, so I want to show you Mike Johnson's response to Marjorie Taylor Greene's threats just from today.
What is your response to Republicans who say this move should cost you your job and that if you don't resign, they will try to oust you?
I am not resigning, and it is, in my view, an absurd notion that someone would bring a vacate motion when we are simply here trying to do our jobs. It is not helpful to the cause. It is not helpful to the country. It does not help the House Republicans advance our agenda, which is in the best interest of the American people here, a secure border, sound governance, and it's not helpful to the unity that we have in the body.
All right, Luke, I got to tell you, Mike Johnson seems a bit more downtrodden and downcast than he has been, and we've seen as to kind of what you've said earlier, kind of a noticeable decline in that, CBN, I think it was Christian Broadcast Network interview. He seemed really sober and somber when it came to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and now he seems even more so, but also a bit more irritated visibly than he has been in the past. Did you catch that?
Definitely. And it makes sense. I think initially he thought that this was just an effort by Marjorie Taylor Greene to become the center of attention for a while, which is what this is about. And she wasn't actually going to do it. It was sort of just a stunt and she wasn't going to call this to a vote. But as she continues with this stunt, it's becoming more and more real to Mike Johnson, and he's having to answer more and more about the possibility of him being ousted, or at least that attempt actually manifesting itself. And I think that really irritates him because instantly your speakership, the whole storyline about it just becomes about how you're hated by a part of your party and they're wanting to get rid of you. And this is while he's trying to deal with the foreign aid package thing, and now he's splitting it up into multiple votes to try to get around that rage coming from MAGA. And so you can imagine why he's a little irked, for lack of a better term.
It probably didn't help that he got that question earlier today on the Fox Propaganda Network, basically from Steve Doocy saying, hey, Mike, you suck so bad and everybody hates you. Have you thought about, just quitting your job and leaving in disgrace? He's probably so sick and tired of it. But listen, I mean, to your point, I think that we may see a situation here where MAGA is eating itself. I mean, which we've seen before, but really in an interesting way, because I don't know if Marjorie Taylor Greene just wasn't expecting Trump to kind of publicly signal that he's coming to Johnson's defense. Maybe she wasn't banking on that either he would back her or he would just stay out of it and let them fight amongst themselves. But now she's almost in a situation where to prove her MAGA bona fides, she almost has to continue escalating the threat despite Trump's words and despite Johnson's visible displeasure. And then it's made even worse because Thomas Massie, a Republican congressman from Kentucky, somebody who's often been, a bit of a wild card with respect to the Republican conference, he apparently told Mike Johnson in this private closed-door session that Johnson better resign, and if not, he will second Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate. So now I'm curious, Luke, do you think this is actually going to happen? I mean, Johnson says he's not going to quit, which I believe him, But do you think that they'll follow through on the threat? It seems pretty likely. Massey's not the sort of guy who, makes empty threats.
Yeah, I think they are eventually going to try to oust him. And I think there will be a vote. And I think Democrats will end up saving Mike Johnson. And that's just hell freezing over. It's such a strange, unlikely scenario. If you told me that's how this was going to go when Mike Johnson initially became speaker, with his past of election denying and present of election denying and his efforts to overturn the election, all that he represents, all of his horrible views, thinking that Democrats might be responsible for saving him. But you understand the trade-off that they're getting because of that and the rationality there. So I do think it'll be called to a vote. I don't think he'll be ousted, but I'm operating under the assumption that we'll be victorious and Democrats will get the majority in the House. But to think about the scary scenario where they don't and Republicans keep the majority, I don't know if Mike Johnson will stay speaker after that. But that's a little ways down the road. The other thing, I don't know if you caught this in the broader press conference, Josiah, but one of the key things that Marjorie Taylor Greene will cite as to why she's upset with Mike Johnson is he funded the DOJ and FBI. What is happening? What are you talking? And she keeps saying it's because of 91 federal indictments against Trump. Obviously, she's referring to 91 felony counts. But still, to say that because your candidate happened to potentially violate the law a bunch of times and now is being held accountable for that, that you're going to go after and defund the police. That's what we're talking about. Defund federal law enforcement to punish them for going after the orange leader. It's crazy how this party has deteriorated in something really horrible.
Yeah, so this is something that I keep harping on a lot on my show when I do videos without you, Luke. And by the way, you're sorely missed when that happens, which is that the party of law and order is not the Republican Party. Law and order, as far as Republicans are concerned, are for other lesser people, liberals, progressives, residents of blue cities, blue states. That's for other people. The Republicans are the party of imposing law and order, and I use air quotes, on others, and then they themselves, well, they can just do whatever they want. They are entitled. You get the sense of entitlement, which exudes from the pores of the likes of Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mike Johnson. They're entitled to do whatever the hell they want, whenever they want, as far as they're concerned. And that's why I think the Democrats, I would argue, have a messaging obligation to seize the notion of law and order, because whether we like it or not, it polls extremely popularly with the American people, and it makes sense. So we should reclaim it, especially when the Republicans have so happily sacrificed it on the altar of Donald Trump. They don't care about law and order. But also, you know, we talked about earlier whether or not Democrats would save Mike Johnson. So I suppose my question to you is, because I go back and forth on this, do you want Democrats to save Mike Johnson? Because Jared Moskowitz, a Democratic congressman, has said repeatedly, and he's even said today on Twitter, that he will provide the bucket of water to put out the fire that Republicans are setting amongst themselves. And I responded and I said, I think you should only save Mike Johnson, only if you can extract meaningful concessions. I don't think he is entitled to Democratic protection, especially after all the terrible things that he has done and said and been a part of. What do you think?
So first, I'll say that this has a lot to do with messaging. So like you're talking about, I do think whether they decided to save him or not, they need to have a clear message as to why they did what they did. And the not saving him is easier. We're not going to jump in and save Republicans from their own chaos. And this is their decision to make. And if they can't pick a leader, that's up to them. But because that is the responsibility of the majority and they're struggling with it. But like you said, if they can get, and it seems like they are going to be able to get concessions out of Mike Johnson that are important enough to them, then yeah, I don't see a problem with doing that trade, especially when Democrats do have a respect for the institution that Republicans don't, and have a respect for serious governance, and probably don't want to spend weeks in that meaningless, unproductive scenario where a speaker's being selected again and MAGA gets all the attention they could ever dream of during that process. So like you said, don't just do it for fun. Get concessions. And if Mike Johnson won't give those, then don't come and save him.
Do you think that we should try to have our cake and eat it too, that no matter what, we save Mike Johnson, don't save Mike Johnson, that we should also be advertising this to the best of our ability? Like, hey, this is an election year, and this is yet another reason, no matter what happens with Mike Johnson, while you all should punish the GOP at the ballot box in November. I think we should do both, no matter what.
And isn't that sort of irritating? You know, Sean Hannity did a segment, I know you covered this, where he tried to blame Democrats for the Arizona Supreme Court ruling and was saying because there's a Democratic governor and attorney general, then really it's up to them to reverse this, even though, of course, it would have to be the legislature. And he very slyly referred to the legislature as almost evenly split because there's a Republican majority. And the point that he eventually made was, hey, don't be mad at Republicans for causing this because Democrats are probably going to fix it. And it's such a strange argument to make in service of Republicans to say Democrats will save their behind. And so here I do feel a little bit like if they're so bad at governing, the American people sort of need to see that, but then it's the American people who suffer whenever they govern so poorly. So it's a hard decision.
Right, Hannity and others, and I've seen centrist political commentators over the past 6 to 8 months, like when we went through this with Kevin McCarthy, Luke. I've seen people basically take the same approach when it was Kevin McCarthy's line or butt on the line, which was that Democrats have some sort of obligation to be the adults in the room and save Republicans, and just completely sidestepping the moral and political agency that the GOP has. And those same conservatives and centrists, by the way, would never say anything like that if the shoe was on the other foot. They would never say that Republicans have an obligation to save Democrats politically from themselves, or that Republicans should be the adults in the room. And it goes back to that asymmetry of expectation, a phrase which we should seriously trademark, because the expectation is that Republicans can behave in the dumbest, least productive ways possible. And actually, Democrats not only can either mitigate the damage or prevent the damage, they have a moral obligation to do that. And if Republicans act a certain way, it's because Democrats let them do it. And really, you should punish Democrats at the ballot box. It's so bizarre and twisted, and it makes my skin crawl. And I suppose that's why I spend so many videos ranting about it.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So, Luke, any final thoughts that you have on this that you care to share?
Just that, as you just emphasized, regardless of how this goes, the message has to be clear. Even if Democrats do save them, we're saving them for the sake of the American people. Don't let this distract from the fact that they are complete and total disaster, completely unable to seriously govern.
Luke, I appreciate you coming here and collaborating with me. It's fun. And where can people find you?
Luke Beasley on YouTube. Absolutely go if you're not already, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you there.
Likewise.